Hey everyone, I'm Casey with CReeves Makes, and today I'm going to show you how I made this wooden frame for these glass shelves and finished it all off with India ink and lacquer. My client has this glass bar cart and they wanted something to match that would fit in this space, so I got to work milling up some wood. I knew that I wanted to use India ink to dye the wood, so I chose ash because the grain character is so prominent. I could not find ash wide enough, so I glued two narrower pieces together to build up to what would ultimately be the depth of the unit. I chose to use dominoes to keep the pieces in line, as some of them had a bow. You don't need to use dominoes, you could use glue, or you can also use dowels or a biscuit joiner to achieve the same thing. The glue up was straightforward after that. One thing that I started doing was I used a shower curtain to lay on my bench before laying out all of my Bessey K-body clamps. This keeps the mess off the tabletop, and after the glue dries, it falls right off the liner. After removing the clamps, I scraped back the joints to remove any excess glue. I do not have the footage, but I ran the panels through the planer to clean them up. You could also use a hand sander for this. I then cross-cut the panels to what would be the overall height of the shelving unit. To capture the shelf, I chose to add dado grooves to the sides and back stretchers. This would ensure that the shelves would stay put. I marked the areas where I wanted the shelves to be and shaded in the areas where the dados would fall. I then cut all the dados using a miter gauge and a spacer block off of my fence. Once all the dados were cut on the sides, I jumped over to cutting them into the back stretchers. The grooves were centered on the workpieces. After that, I did a test fit with the glass shelf. Then, using a scrap cutoff from the stretchers, I marked out where to notch the side panels for them to fit into. With the stretchers being mounted to the wall studs, this feature would key the sides onto them and provide a much stronger shelving unit. Back to the dado stack on the table saw. The panels were lined up and clamped together and then clamped to a miter fence. I then clamped the panels to the miter fence and pushed them through the dado stack, moving them over to remove as much as I needed to make the fit. After all the cutting was complete, I did a dry fit in my corner clamps and did a final test fit with the glass. One thing that I needed to address was these little pockets on the sides left over from the dado cuts. I just took some scrap wood and made little plugs to fill in the voids, glued them into place, and sanded them flush on both sides. I did a final sanding to all the pieces and then it was time for the glue up. Using these corner clamp jigs makes it easy to hold and align everything as you go. Once your pieces are lined up and secured in the jig, add some clamps to the joint to keep it all together. And then it was the same for each of the stretchers. And finally, it's time to add the India ink. I was so excited to see how this was going to turn out with the wood grain and the design of this shelving unit. I added one coat of India ink and let it all soak in, and then I went back and touched up the spots where the grain was thirstier. For a final finish, I chose to use General Finishes Pre-Cat Lacquer. This sprays extremely well, dries quickly, and leaves a beautiful satin finish. This was one of those projects where I got to go and do the install myself. I started by marking out all of the studs and then transferring those marks onto the shelf. I also added some screws to the stretcher joints for security and then drilled my mounting holes for the unit itself. I held the shelf in place and added one screw near the center of the unit. I then used my level to get everything in place, and then added the rest of the screws. All that was left was to slide the shelves in and wipe everything down. The cool feature of using the dado on the back stretchers is that when you slid the shelves all the way in, the screw heads disappeared because of the glass. No visible hardware. Well, what do you think of this space in the shelving unit? The client was super excited to see it in place along with the cart. I'd like to thank Bessey for sponsoring this video and for providing me with a variety of clamps to get the job done. They offer such an assortment of clamps and accessories that I don't think there's anything you can't clamp up. If you like this video, please click subscribe and stay tuned for more. I'm Casey with CReeves Makes, and thanks for watching.